So now let me talk with our first guest, the governor of Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia, the 73rd governor, Governor Ralph Northam. Thank you very much, Governor, for coming.
David, thanks so much for having me, and I hope you and your viewers are all staying healthy and safe during this pandemic.
Thank you. And I should point out that the governor has an unusual background. Most people in political life might be a lawyer, maybe a business person in some respects, but the governor is a pediatric neurologist. There are very few pediatric neurologists who end up being governor of states, but he's maybe one of the first. And he is a graduate of Virginia Military Institute, VMI, and went into the military for 8 years. And while in the military, got his medical degree at Eastern Virginia Medical School. And as I say, practiced pediatric neurology for quite some time before he got into government. And he was a state senator, a lieutenant governor, and now governor. So, Governor, you made a little news recently when you thought that it would be a good idea for the Robert E. Lee statue in Richmond to be taken down. And now a court has held that up for a bit. What's the status of that?
Well, it is in the court system, but David, just going back a little bit, these statues have been the source of a lot of divisiveness for years. They have been discussed. And then we had the tragedy, as most people remember, in Charlottesville a couple of years ago. And that was really centered around the Robert E. Lee statue. We lost a young lady during that time. One of the protests, lost 2 of our state troopers. And then, we had the unrest, the terrible tragedy in Minneapolis that really brought this into focus again. We've had a number of marches, protests, and again, this Robert E. Lee statue is just a symbol. It glorifies a time in our history that none of us should be proud of. And so I made the decision that it needs to come down. Now, interestingly, David, there are other Confederate monuments in Richmond. They are owned and controlled by the city of Richmond. The statue of Robert E. Lee, and there's some interesting history of that, was put up in 1890, but it is owned by the Commonwealth of Virginia. So we've actually been looking at this legally, talking with our counsel over the last year. We feel that we're on solid ground, but there has been two lawsuits. There's an injunction right now that will go on for a few days. We hope this process will go quickly, and at the end of the day, this statue will come down.
When it comes down, what will you do with the statue? Will you give it to somebody else, or you destroy it? What do you do with the statue?
Well, we'll go into storage initially in a safe place, and then there will be discussion on where it would best be placed, whether that be in a museum or in a cemetery. And then there's a little bit more complicated, the pedestal on which the statue stands. We'll have discussion on what to do with that, whether that should be taken down or whether we can use that to put different exhibits to welcome people to Richmond. As you may know, Richmond has become a very diverse, progressive, and inclusive city. And again, this is a gateway. This Monument Avenue is a gateway into the city of Richmond. And I think there are a lot other better ways we can promote inclusiveness and diversity than what's on top of the pedestal now.
So are there other statues or Confederate symbols that are also ones under the control of the governor, and so that you could remove them? And are you planning to do so, or are there others like this?
This is the only one that's strictly under control of the Commonwealth. There are a couple of statues on Capitol Square, one of Robert E. Lee, another of Harry Byrd. A lot of discussion is going on as to what to do with those, but we'll let the General Assembly, the legislature, decide on that, and I'll certainly work with them. But this particular statue, the Robert E. Lee statue on Monument Avenue, is the one that we have control over presently.
So the killing of George Floyd is a wake-up moment for many Americans. And are you, as the governor, working on any other initiatives to kind of reduce racial tensions and to increase the dialogue between the races about what might be done to improve the relationships? Is there anything else you're doing now?
We are, David, and just to kind of look at our history of 400 years, and I think this is what a lot of people really need to understand, especially people not of color, like you and me, and I suspect a lot of your viewers, and that is the subject of Black oppression. And I think that if you look at our history, we obviously had the Civil War. and that's behind us. And then we had Jim Crow, and now that's behind us. Then we had massive resistance and then mass incarceration. And I think what this episode in Minneapolis just displayed, brought into focus, was that we still have Black oppression in our society today, just in a different form. And so there are a lot of what I would call other monuments of inequities. Inequities in access to healthcare, access to education, access to the voting booth, access to business opportunities. And so our administration has been working on a lot of those, but we obviously have a lot more work to do, and we're committed to doing that. I have another 1.5 years left, and we're going to continue a lot of the good work that's been done already.
Now, you point out you have 1.5 years left. Virginia is the only state in the union which only allows its governor one term in consecutively. You could run it after if you're out for a while. Do you think that's a good idea or not?
Well, I could argue both sides of it. You know, David, I'm smiling a little bit. You know, with COVID-19, this has been 24/7, just nonstop for me and for our cabinet secretaries, our administration. So right now, I would lean toward saying that one term is a very good idea. Obviously, I followed, you know, Governor McAuliffe. I was his lieutenant governor. We worked very closely together. So when the same party, you know, takes over, it makes it a lot more consistent with a lot of the things, priorities that we've been working on. You know, if you switch parties, then you have to kind of start reinventing the wheel. So there are pros and cons, but you know, following Terry was a good thing, and we've had our hands full. And I kid with people. You know, we had a great session, got a lot of good things done, a very progressive budget, and then COVID-19, and now the racial unrest. The last thing we need right now at this time of year is a hurricane, so we'll keep our fingers crossed. But hopefully we can get through this fall and get out of COVID-19, get our economy recovered, and kind of get back to near normal as best we can.
You also followed Patrick Henry and Thomas Jefferson. They were previous governors. Isn't it kind of intimidating to sit in the same seat that those individuals had?
It is. You know, what's really neat, David, is, you know, on Capitol Square and really the governor's mansion, there's just so much history. You know, that governor's mansion has been there and has been, a governor has lived in it since 1813. And so the portraits and the furniture and so to kind of go in there and look around and just soak up the history is really impressive. And so it's been a tremendous privilege to serve as the 73rd governor.
So are there protests going on now, regular protests, nonviolent protests in Virginia? And are the violent protests, if there were any in Virginia, are they over in your view?
Well, there have been a number of protests, David, and going on for a couple of weeks now. As you know, we called in the National Guard because of some of the looting that was going on. Most of the protests are nonviolent. We have another protest scheduled in Richmond tomorrow with thousands of people scheduled to be there. And so we do have a law enforcement presence, and we encourage people to be peaceful. As you have probably heard, some of these statues, one in Portsmouth was taken down. Actually, an individual was seriously hurt. And so I have encouraged people that there's a process as we move forward to removing these statues, and to please let us do that in a safe and responsible manner.
Now, speaking of the National Guard, did you have any of your National Guard in Washington, D.C.? I think some National Guards around the states came to Washington, D.C. Was the Virginia National Guard there, and are they there now if they were before?
I'll try to make a long story short, David. The president understands that he can't use the United States military's presence in Washington, D.C. And so what he did was requested National Guard from a number of states. We actually had a phone conference with the president on the Monday morning. His rhetoric was just terrible. It was divisive. I saw what was getting ready to happen, just looking at a lot of National Guard coming to Washington, being militarized. And I said, I'm not going to send the National Guard for a photo op. And that's exactly what he ended up doing later that day. So we decided, you know, after hearing that and just seeing what was going on, to keep our National Guard in Virginia. And by the way, we had, you know, a number of protests there was plenty going on in Virginia that we wanted to keep them here. And finally, I have a very close relationship with Mayor Bowser, as well as Governor Hogan. We try to really coordinate in the greater Washington area. And Mayor Bowser knew nothing about this, and she hadn't requested the National Guard. So I let the Secretary of Defense and the President know that until everybody, is on the same sheet of music, we're not planning on sending the National Guard to Washington, D.C.
Okay, let's talk about COVID-19. How devastating has it been to your state so far? How many people have died? How many people have been infected? And do you think the worst is behind you, or you think the worst is yet to come?
Great questions. It's been very difficult. We've had over 1,500 deaths, over 55,000 cases of COVID-19. And we took some aggressive measures early on. As you probably remember, I closed schools for the springtime. We reached out to our hospitals, who, by the way, have been so helpful to stop doing elective surgery, so that we had the capacity available if so needed, so that we had the equipment that we would need, PPE, all of these types of things. So the way I have tried to describe this and move forward, David, is that we are in the middle of a health crisis. We're also in the middle of an economic crisis. And as soon as we can get the health crisis under control, then I'm confident that our economy will get back up and running. But the main challenge, and people need to understand this, we basically, you introduced me kindly and said that I was a military doctor, which I was. We trained for chemical and biological war. We are in the middle of a biological war right now, and we have been asked to fight this war as governors with absolutely no supplies. There's been little to no direction from Washington. So as an example, when it comes to, for example, PPE, governors have literally been competing with each other for the supply of that, and also the testing capabilities. So we've kind of had to start from ground zero. We've made a lot of progress. We're in a good place now with our testing, with our PPE, with our hospital capacity. So we want to get into phase 2 and phase 3 and get our economy back up and running.
All right, so you're in phase 2 now, is that correct?
We are. Everybody in Virginia as of today, including Northern Virginia and Richmond, is in phase 2.
So if you're in phase 2, can I go to a restaurant and without a mask, or do I have to have a mask if I go to a restaurant?
Well, we would encourage you to have a mask. Obviously, it's difficult to drink or eat without a mask, but our restaurants are at 50% capacity, both indoors and outdoors. The tables are spaced. We're trying to abide by the 6-foot physical distancing rule. Your server, however, is required to have a mask. And so it'll look a little bit different when you go into the restaurant. But when you talked about, has this been devastating to Virginia and our economy, it's especially been devastating to our hospitality industry and our restaurant owners. And as soon as we can, get them back up and running full swing, the better for our economy and better for their businesses.
So you needed to shut the schools down for the spring part of the year, but are schools going to reopen K-12 in the fall?
Yes, sir, they are. We've done a tremendous amount of work. Our Secretary of Education, our Superintendent of Public Instruction, just a lot of people have been at the table, and we will have our students back in K-12 in the fall, and also our scholars back on the campuses of our colleges and universities with some restrictions, but I think life will go on, and it's just so important for people to get back into school this fall.
What about athletic events? Will there be the University of Virginia able to play football? Virginia Tech be able to play football?
They will be, but for example, in the stadiums, I don't think the stadiums will be as full as they have been in the past. We will, have the social distancing. And a lot of this, David, and I'm asked these questions every day, and I appreciate that, but this is a novel virus, and we really can't predict. So we've got to be a bit nimble as we move forward and kind of prepare for a lot of different scenarios. And that's what we've tried to do, whether it be with our schools, businesses, sports, all of those things have been, a lot of thought has gone into it.
At the low point, what was the lowest the unemployment rate was in Virginia, and what is the unemployment rate now in Virginia?
Yes, well, just to go back a little bit historically, our unemployment rate back in February and March before COVID-19 was 2.6. It was at a historical low level. Now it's a little bit over 10%. We expect that to come down. Obviously, we've had, believe it or not, over 700,000 Virginians apply for unemployment, more in a few weeks than we had over the last 3 years. But what I would like to remind people, David, our economy was strong in Virginia. We have relied in the past on a lot of military and government contracting, and that has continued to stay strong during COVID-19. Our revenue in this year of March compared to last year was 12.8% higher. So that's how well Virginia was doing until COVID-19 hit. But I'm confident. We've taken about an $800 million hit during the last quarter. Probably be a total when we look at the next 2 years of around $2.5 to $3 billion. Our reserve fund is very strong in Virginia. We've prepared for a rainy day. We've had a lot of assistance from the federal level through the CARES Act, about $3.3 billion. We've asked for a little bit more flexibility so we can use that in some other ways. But we're going to come out of this, I think, in a very strong position, especially compared to other states.
So under Virginia law, do you have to balance your budget every year?
Absolutely, and that's a good thing.
So by doing that, you'll be able to do that even with the revenue shortfalls. You'll be able to balance your budget.
Yes, sir. We had, as I said earlier, one of the most progressive budgets that Virginia has ever had. A lot of investment in education, early childhood education, historically Black colleges and universities, and so when COVID-19 hit, rather than sign the budget, we put a pause or hit the hold button, and so I'm going to bring the legislature back in August. We'll do a reforecast probably in mid-July. We'll have a lot better idea of our revenue at that time, and then really hopefully take up some of the priorities that we had in our budget before our legislature went home.
So, Governor, you've been managing the state from where? You're doing it remotely. Most of the employees, I guess, are home. How hard has it been to manage the state remotely, and what have you learned in the process of doing that?
I've learned, David, that I'm not as good at technology as I should be, but I have a lot of young folks that help me out. The Patrick Henry building, which is where our office is and where all of the cabinet secretaries' offices are, is right beside the governor's mansion. So it's literally about 50 yards of a walk for me. So that hasn't been an issue. The technology has been a little bit more of a challenge for me, but it's probably a good thing.
So in the end, do you expect that all of your employees will come back to their regular offices in the next several months and work with masks or without masks? How will that work?
Yes, sir. They will come back to work. We've been doing a lot of teleworking, which has worked well. But, I have encouraged really all Virginians, but especially our staff, when they can't keep more than 6 feet of distance to please wear a mask to protect themselves and also to protect others. And, I think for the most part, David, Virginians have done a good job. Certainly not everybody wants to abide by the rules, but for the most part, we've been able to make those changes. And the largest reason for that was really for our hospital capacity, to make sure that if we had a surge of COVID-19 cases, that we would be able to care for them. And we've been able to keep our hospitalizations down and really been able to keep our supplies where they need to be. So I think Virginia's in good shape, and we're going to continue to practice good habits, and just hope if we can do that we won't have a resurgence of this in the fall. That would be very damaging for Virginia and for the rest of this country.
So 2 of your predecessors as governor are now in the United States Senate. And some of your predecessors have run again for governor after they had some time out, and I think one succeeded. So do you have any aspirations to ever run for office, the Senate, governor, or president of the United States? Or what do you think you're going to do when your term is over?
David, I appreciate the question. And, you never know exactly what's going to happen. But I'm a co-owner of a medical practice, which I founded in Northam, Virginia, called Children's Specialty Group. We have a little bit over 100 pediatric subspecialists, and sometimes when you're away from something, you realize you actually enjoyed it and missed it more than you knew. And so I look forward to going back to Hampton Roads and taking care of sick children and their families. That's what I'm good at, and that's what I enjoy. And I look forward to doing that for a number of years.
So what does a pediatric neurologist specialize in? That was your specialty, pediatric neurology. What actually does that entail?
Yes, so well, it's 3 years of general pediatrics and then 3 years of neurology, and also with some background in psychiatry. But the majority of my practice is epilepsy, taking care of children with seizures, migraine headaches, brain tumors, muscular dystrophy, those types of diseases. And while, it's an exciting time, David, because we know that there's a genetic cause for a lot of these disorders and diseases, and we're now finding cures. And so I look forward to being back in the office, back at the bedside. And there's just, I think it's a hopeful time for families that we can finally have some cures for some of these diseases. Because as you might imagine, talking to parents about some of these can be very difficult. But I think there's a lot of hope on the horizon. So I look forward to being back in the office.
How do you compare the thrill of getting a bill through the legislature and the thrill of solving a child's epilepsy?
Well, it's an interesting question. And the contrast, David, in healthcare, most of the time, families will come and say, thank you, Dr. Northam. We really appreciate what you have done. Politics is totally different. Every decision I make, there are some people that are happy and there are a number of people that aren't. And so it's been an interesting contrast. But I've been in politics now since 2007. It's been a great run. I've enjoyed the privilege, but at the end of this 4 years, I look forward to being back in health.
A final question, Governor, is it is said years ago that Virginia is for lovers. Now, is this still the case post-COVID-19? Is Virginia still for lovers?
Absolutely. And, we just, believe it or not, 50 years for that motto in Virginia. And, I think we're really moving forward, David, to continue to be for lovers. We really need to address the inequities that we were talking about earlier and really make sure that Virginia is welcoming and inclusive, that our lights are on, our doors are open, and especially for business. We are a business-friendly state, and we want to continue to be in that position.
Thank you very much, Governor. I appreciate your time, and thank you for the job that you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me, David.
Bye. Thank you.